Inference to the best explanation is not only good for solving crimes, it's good in everyday life. So, in order to consider this concept, let's look at the three types of reasoning before we home in on this last method. Of the three types of reasoning, we need to consider three elements. First, there's a cause, and there's an effect, and we want to discover some type of relationship between the cause and the effect. Any two of these elements could be paired to discover the third. So, let's consider that we know the rule and the cause, and we're trying to come up with the effect. This is called deduction. Let's take an example. Suppose you know that all of my students are seniors. That's the rule. And then you learn that Allie is one of my students. And that's the cause for the conclusion that Allie is a senior. Now, this is good in physics and chemistry and all forms of hard sciences. It's good for theory testing. If it turns out that Allie is not a senior and that he is one of my students, then we need to question the rule. Now, suppose we know the cause and the effect, and we're trying to come up with a rule relating the two together. This would be called induction. Let's take an example. Suppose that I am observing swans, and in the process I notice that all the swans I see are white. Well, I could conclude a rule that all swans are white. That's because I haven't been to Australia and seen the black swans there. But this technique is good in all the hard sciences, just like before, except it's good for theory development. The theory development in this case is coming up with the rule that all swans are white. I would then use deduction to test the rule. One more possibility. If I know the rule and I have an effect, then I can go backwards to the cause, and that is called abduction. Now, there's different kinds of abduction, so let's be clear on what we're talking about here. This is going backwards from the effect to the cause. Let's take an example. A man was found dead with a knife in his back. Now, people don't stab themselves in the back ordinarily, so I'm going to conclude that this was a murder. This is good for any kind of forensics, but it's also good in archaeology, any kind of history, including natural history such as geology and paleontology. It is good for any non-repeatable past event. You're never going to be able to go back and prove what happened, so you're just going to have to come up with the best possible evidence and the best conclusion from the evidence. Could there be other possibilities? Certainly there could. And that means there could be other causes. Perhaps the man was juggling knives, and he threw one really high, and then he remembered he needed to tie his shoe. So he bends over to tie his shoe, and oh man, he gets stabbed right in the back. Well, if that's the case, we're talking about an accident. Another possibility would be that this man wanted to kill himself, and so he reached around and twisted his arm in such a way that he could actually stab himself in the back. Or maybe he held the knife to his back and fell backwards on it. Well, if that was the case, we're talking about a suicide. Now, all of these are possibilities, but how do we consider which one is the best possibility? This is where we get into inference to the best explanation. They're all possible, but which one is most likely? We need to consider, first of all, does the explanation fit the evidence? I think the possibility of a knife landing in his back after throwing it up in the air is pretty unlikely, especially at the speed to be required to kill him. Second, I don't know how this person would put up with the pain of killing himself by stabbing himself in the back. We need to also consider the simplest possible explanation. We don't know that this man was a juggler. We don't know how high the ceiling was. We don't know that the man wanted to commit suicide. We don't know that he was able to bend his arm in such a position. All of this introduces new things, and it makes it more complicated. So if we're going with the simplest explanation, then we're going to have to go with this was a murder. Let's take another example. Everyone holds moral standards of some type. Now, we don't all agree on them, but it's amazing worldwide how many morals we hold in common. And yet, we all violate our own moral standards. Now, if we violate our own moral standards, it seems like we would either work hard to get better or change our moral standards. This would suggest the possibility that there is a moral lawgiver beyond ourselves. He's the one that's causing us to be sensitive to morals. This is what we call the moral argument for God. Now, are there other possibilities? Yes. Humans could have evolved to have morals. Of course, this would be a series of accidents. It would result in us doing what benefits our offspring. Another possibility is we learned accountability to society. Now, if that's the case, and that's all there is to it, then we would just simply work hard not to get caught. In both these other cases, we're having to come up with something that doesn't quite fit, and also something that is more complex and requires more conditions. So, again, the simplest idea is that there is a moral lawgiver, and that we violate our own moral standards. So, we're at his mercy. Fortunately, he's not only reasonable, but he is merciful.